to Unbiased Science,
where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're your hosts, Dr. Jess Dyer
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
And this week, we are talking all about food allergies, food sensitivities, and those food tests or food sensitivity tests that you probably see advertised every single time you open up your Instagram. We are joined by Dr. Farah Khan, who will introduce in just one moment. And you're going to love her. She is bringing sassy Farah energy, and we have lots to say on this topic. Before we get into it, a little public health update. So this article dropped, February 11th in Science. And the headline is Rare Dangerous Side Effects of Some COVID-19 Vaccines Explained. So a groundbreaking study uncovers why the adenovirus, am I saying that correctly, Sarah? Is it adenovirus based shots caused life-threatening blood clots and bleeding in some people. So if y'all remember, early in the pandemic, I don't remember the timing, but completely separate from the Pfizer and Moderna mRNA shots, there were these other vaccines. Remember the AstraZeneca and J&J vaccines, and they were rolled out in 2021, and unfortunately, a small number of people developed those really dangerous blood clots. And then it also combined with low platelets and bleeding, and it was rare, but it was very serious. So it occurred in about 1 in 200,000 vaccinated people. And because we have these amazing vaccine surveillance systems set up, we saw the safety signal immediately, and those shots were pulled from the market, right? So that's why you don't see those shots available anymore. But scientists really wanted to get to the bottom of why was that happening. And so there was this great study that was done, and I just want to share a little bit about what was found. So here we go. So both of those vaccines, the AstraZeneca and J&J vaccines, used an adenovirus, so a modified common cold virus, as a delivery vehicle. And researchers found that natural adenovirus infections, so not talking about vaccines, just the infection, can actually rarely cause a similar syndrome. So this tells us that what was going on was not a story about dangerous vaccine ingredients. It was a story about adenoviruses. So we did a post on this. I'll try to summarize it briefly. But basically, adenovirus carries a protein that resembles a human protein involved in clotting. And when the immune system encounters it, it does exactly what it's supposed to. It makes antibodies to fight it. Up to 60% of people have a common inherited variation in how those antibodies are shaped, making them susceptible to confusing the two proteins. For almost all of them, nothing goes wrong. A second thing has to happen. A very specific mutation must occur within the same antibody-producing B cell that alters the binding properties of the antibody, resulting in redirection to the body's own clotting factor instead of the virus protein. So long story short, this is a very rare thing, and a couple of things have to be lined up, right? You have to have these genetic predispositions, these specific, what did I call them? Inherited variations to have these negative side effects, but it had nothing to do with the vaccine ingredients. It had to do with adenovirus. So anyway, thought it was really, really cool to read this. The safety system, the vaccine surveillance system worked really, really, really well. And now we have a better understanding of, the use of this technology moving forward so that we could hopefully prevent this from ever happening again. All right, I'm done rambling. Let's turn it over to Sarah to introduce today's guest.
All right, you guys, we are thrilled today to welcome Dr. Farah Khan. She is a double board certified allergist and immunologist. She practices in Columbus, Ohio, and primarily is focused on pediatric patients. We are very, very excited to talk to her about a variety of different subjects. I feel like we're going to have no shortage of things to discuss. Farah, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
So as always, we like to kick off with a question, because I know Jess gave us a little update on something that caught her attention recently. But we wanted to ask you, what is something in the news recently that has caught your attention, and why do you think people should be caring about it these days?
Well, the first thing that comes into my mind is the assault on my eyeballs from the video of RFK and the quote unquote musician and whatever was happening in that video. Like anything coming out of that platform right now is cringeworthy, but also like I hate that people are paying attention to it and are actually taking health advice from this guy and then making decisions for themselves, their kids, their parents, based off of incomplete and sometimes completely made up health information. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing was over the last few months, RFK Jr., our unfortunate choice for HHS secretary, is just spewing a lot of mis and maybe even disinformation. Like I think a lot of it is purposeful, knowing that there's no connection, but like food allergies or vaccines cause food allergies. And he was on some platform with some nonprofit organization a few months ago where he gets up there and he just says enough words where people are like, I think this might be right, like mast cells and B cells and food allergies. And then he ends up summarizing it completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be clear, vaccines do not cause food allergies.
Mic drop. Thank you, Farah, for clarifying that. No connection.
Apparently it needed to be said.
Apparently it did. And it's so interesting. And I'm so glad that you're here to talk with us because the MAHA movement is very focused on food right now. Food is a hot topic, food ingredients, this idea that we're super unhealthy. The foods that we're eating are terrible and they're causing
the new food pyramid.
That's a whole other conversation. It's a whole other thing. But I think it would be really helpful, Farah, if you sort of let's take a beat. Sorry. I got so many questions. What is a food allergy, food intolerance, food sensitivity? Help us differentiate these terms.
Yes. So I think everybody just uses food allergies to describe any adverse food reaction, right? But I think of adverse food reaction sort of as the umbrella with different buckets underneath it. So the food allergy, the classic thing that people think about and hear about in the news, like, oh, my kid had peanut or eggs and then had lip swelling and hives and vomiting, and we ended up in the ER and needed an EpiPen. Those are mediated by a very specific cellular mechanism. There's no made up woohoo kind of nonsense going on. There's a very specific mechanism that's happening in your immune system that has identified something that shouldn't be dangerous, like peanut or egg or bee venom. And it's having a very dramatic, exaggerated response. And it's reproducible every single time you're exposed to that allergen. So it's not just oh, I can't have shrimp at home in San Francisco, but when I travel to Spain, I can eat all the shrimp. No, ma'am, that's not how it works. Okay, so your immune system remembers. Those are the traditional food allergies. And then food intolerances are a little bit, they're difficult for patients and parents and families to navigate and for healthcare professionals because there are no validated tests to help. And every single patient may have a different set of symptoms. And it also varies sometimes on how much of that allergen or that food you eat, right? So people that have a dairy intolerance or a lactose intolerance or gluten intolerance, sometimes you can tolerate a spoonful of ice cream, right? But you can't sit down and eat a whole bucket of ice cream. What are those things called?
Pine.
Right?
Pine, yeah. I like bucket. I'm eating ice cream by the bucket.
I would rather have a bucket than a pint.
And then you can have all kinds of GI manifestations like belly pain, bloating. You can switch between diarrhea and constipation. And they're valid symptoms. We just don't have good testing for it. And so it's very frustrating, especially for, I think, the way that Americans perceive healthcare, because if you don't have a test to validate your symptoms, sometimes it also feels like the provider doesn't trust you. And providers have been part of the problem, right? With dismissing these symptoms and things like that. And then food sensitivities, we can talk about the scam that is the IgG test. But you can have any number of more vague symptoms to particular foods. But all of these adverse food reactions, there might be a little bit of an overlap. And I think that's why they all get deposited into the food allergy bucket, even though it's not right.
That was so helpful. Thank you. Thank you. So then, okay, one follow-up, I'm so sorry, Sarah, and then over to you because I know you have questions too. Are these things, like, are you born with these things? Can they develop at any point in your life? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, because I mean, like, I'll just say, like, as a personal anecdote, like, I am progressively becoming more and more lactose intolerant as I age. I hit 30, and then now I get very sick when I eat pizza. It's not in the sense that, like, my throat closes up and I go into anaphylaxis, but, like, I'm definitely uncomfortable. And I just, like, that's not something that, like, was happening when I was a teenager. I could eat all the pizza, and I did eat all the pizza, ice cream, what have you. And then now I can't do that anymore. So, but I know that's different than, like, someone having having an anaphylactic reaction when they eat peanuts.
So lactose intolerance is also a little bit interesting because it's the sugar that your gut can't break down, and because of the buildup, right, you get all of the uncomfortable GI symptoms. And as you get a little bit older, you lose more and more of that enzymatic activity, which is why you end up tolerating less and less. So I am so sad to hear this pizza saga.
Yeah.
Same. My Brooklyn heart breaks. Yeah.
But yeah, oh gosh, where do I start? Okay, so food allergies. The primary driver is genetics, but a lot of this also varies with how those genes get turned on or off and how they're how they're interplaying with our environment, right? So even if a parent has a peanut allergy and then has a child, that child isn't necessarily at risk. Like, the parent hasn't given the peanut allergy gene to their child, which I talk about a lot in clinic, because parents sometimes, moms especially, will come in and they just feel guilty because they're like, I have a cashew allergy. Like, did I give this to my kid? And the answer is no, unlikely, but the genetics piece of this can put you at higher risk of developing other food allergies. But you can also develop food allergies later in life. Shellfish is a big example for people, for older adults. So you'll go like 45 years without having any issues with shrimp or crab or lobster. And then one day you're at a party eating that shrimp cocktail and your immune system decides to revolt and have an allergic reaction. So...
Okay, I'm hungry. Sorry. Pizza, shrimp cocktail. You should have eaten before we recorded. All right. So how do we assess whether we have a food allergy? Now, let's talk about the legitimate things first, and then we're going to get into the grift. So how do we actually diagnose allergies?
People are going to be surprised, but the primary thing that I use, that any good evidence-based board-certified allergist who lives and breathes in 2026 is the clinical history. So what has happened when you have eaten that food? That's what I want to know. And we are, like, a good allergist is really nosy. I want to know how much you ate, how it was prepared, when did the symptoms start, how long did they last, did you end up in the urgent care? I want to know more details than most people, because that really helps me. Like, it gives me a sense of what is happening with that food before I even do any testing. And the testing that we have available, whether it's the scratch testing that people think about with allergists or even the lab work, it's only measuring the IgE antibody to that specific food. So it only helps us with that first bucket, with the classic food allergies with peanut and shrimp and things like that. It absolutely does not help with intolerances or sensitivities or anything like that. And that is a huge misconception. People think that they're just going to, like, come to the allergist and I'm going to tell you the 52 foods that you're going to have weird reactions to. And that is just not good medicine.
Now, let's get into the grift, because anytime I open up my Facebook, my Instagram, I am being flooded with ads for these at-home food sensitivity tests. And then probably to no one's surprise, in the same breath, it's like, let's diagnose you with something, and then P.S. here's a supplement that you could take to, right? But so let's talk about what that is that they're selling to us and whether or not it's legitimate.
And then maybe when you're answering this also, maybe you could compare and contrast like the IgG testing versus like you mentioned IgE. Like what's the difference between those two things?
Number one, it's not legitimate at all. I don't understand why these companies have not been sued up the wazoo, because the claims that they are making are also wildly inaccurate. And unfortunately, unless you have a medical background, it's very hard to differentiate, right? Like you're having symptoms, you're trying to figure out how to help yourself. You're trying to figure out if you can make some simple dietary changes. And each test costs like a few $100. Like it's not cheap. So it's a scam. Save your money. Do not purchase. If that is the only thing that you take away from today's episode, this will be wildly successful. And the reason for that is because the sensitivity tests that are being marketed to patients are measuring something called IgG, which is a different antibody. And the simplest way that I tell parents and patients when I'm talking about this in clinic is that, it's going to say you have IgG to honeydew and tomato and squash. Like all it tells me is that, oh my gosh, your immune system is working exactly as I want it to because you have been exposed to that food. Like, yay! Like that's what the test measures. Like, yay, your immune system works, right? Because you've eaten the honeydew and the tomato and the squash before. But it absolutely does not impact food intolerances or sensitivities, and definitely not food allergies.
That should piss everyone off.
Yeah.
Like that is absolutely wild to hear what you just said. So it's just basically telling us whether our body has encountered that thing and developed some sort of an immune response, which we would expect. Okay. And we're paying hundreds of dollars for these tests.
Yep.
Not including the money you're paying for the supplements to cure the ailment.
Well, that's a great segue, Sarah. So aside from this blatant grift, which we're now telling people do not waste your money on these things, if someone does have a legitimate, diagnosed by an allergist or an immunologist allergy, what are the treatments? Is there a quote unquote cure? What does that look like?
So this answer is a little bit more complicated than like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So traditionally you would get diagnosed with your peanut or milk or egg allergy.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
And then you would just have to carry your EpiPen and read labels. And and that was kind of it, to be honest. And then you would go in annually to see if your lab numbers were getting lower and were you potentially outgrowing these food allergies. Now, especially since the LEAP trial, LEAP, was published back in 2015, people are still referring to this trial as new, which kind of blows my mind because it's more than 10 years old. But it really turned, it was revolutionary in the world of allergy and infant feeding, because what we realized is that the sooner you introduce an allergen by mouth, it helps to teach the gut to tolerate it, and you are much less likely to develop an allergy. Historically, we were telling parents and patients, don't eat peanut until you're 3 and don't eat eggs until you're 2. And that avoidance is what contributed to, unfortunately, a large number of kids that are now Gen Z and they have food allergies.
Right.
But what was the question?
How do we, if someone has an allergy, are there treatments or is there,
Is there a cure for allergies, for food allergies?
Yes. So out of the LEAP trial over the last decade or so, what we have realized is that even if you have a true allergic reaction to the peanut butter or to the cashew or something like that, you can actually do something called oral or sublingual immunotherapy, which traditionally just uses like regular food like peanut powder or peanut butter or peanuts or something like that to retrain your immune system to tolerate the thing that it's allergic to very, very slowly. Don't do this at home.
Right.
Come in and talk to an allergist who practices in this realm. So that has been incredible. And I think in the first few years of life, the data is showing like up to age 3 or 4 is what the studies are capturing right now. You can actually potentially reverse the peanut allergy or reverse some of these food allergies. So if we can get these young babies and toddlers into pediatric allergists, I mean, that's probably going to be the game changer. And then there's other medications like Xolair or omalizumab, which helps to bind up the allergy cells so that they are no longer available to have an allergic reaction if you have an accidental exposure, but it doesn't retrain your immune system in the same way. So is it the thing that I reach for in like a new 9-month-old peanut allergy diagnosis? Like, no.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. We were talking about like how you can develop some certain intolerances and even allergies as you grow older, right? Is there, on the flip side, can you also outgrow allergies? Like you have an allergy when you're born and when you're a young child, and then as you get older, you don't have as strong of a reaction anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So egg and milk are the top 1 and 2 food allergies for kids in the US, and about 80% will outgrow by the time they're in like their early elementary years. So it's really hard those first 3, 4, 5 years that you're having to avoid. But most kids will outgrow, not everybody. But in contrast to like peanut allergies, which really only 20% of kids will outgrow. And then that number is even smaller for something like tree nuts, like barely 10% of kids will outgrow. So yes, you can potentially outgrow. It just kind of depends on the food.
Sure.
I have a question. I feel this is going to be like rapid fire. I have like 30 questions for you. We have to talk about gluten. Oh,
yes.
Gluten.
Big sigh.
Yeah, big sigh. So a common refrain that I'm hearing, I mean, first of all, there are certainly legitimate allergies to gluten. Some of my dear friends have celiac disease, right? And they cannot eat gluten. But it feels like this has become a trendy thing. In addition to being a legitimate thing, some people are like, well, I just don't feel well. I feel bloated. I feel uncomfortable when I eat gluten. Or, well, I have a slight segue, but bear with me. Let me just finish this train of thought. While we're talking about bread and gluten, people will say, oh, well, when I went to Italy, I felt so different when I was eating the pasta and the breads in Italy versus here in the US. And then it's a whole like pile-on to how terrible and toxic our food is here in the US. And I'm like, hi, you were on vacation in Italy. Methinks there were other variables that were contributing to your happiness and comfort levels.
Yeah.
But can you just like talk about all things gluten, please?
Yeah. So wheat is actually one of the top 9 allergens for people in the US, which means that your immune system can have that traditional allergic reaction to wheat products. And then celiac disease, you're generally followed by our GI colleagues and counterparts, right? You need to keep the wheat in your diet in order to do the endoscopy, to get biopsies, in order to confirm the inflammation before you go gluten-free. It's not just like, what's the vibe today?
Right.
Okay. Like there's also requirements and criteria and standards for celiac disease. And then there's this whole like subset of people that just don't feel great when they sit down and have like a giant bowl of mac and cheese. And those symptoms are very valid. Do we have testing for it? No, we don't. And also it's going to vary from person to person and from amount to amount. And this like craziness of like, sometimes like like the point of the ultra processed, what is it? 70% of our food is ultra processed in the US. I'm like, yeah, why is that, right? Like, why don't we have better infrastructure to get like farm to table and to support our local farm? Like those are bigger regulatory policy issues that this episode is probably cannot contain. So I say the same thing, Jess, which is like, the pasta is probably made less harshly in terms of like the drying process and things like that in Italy. But also like, I don't know. Sometimes I run out of words in clinic too. I'm like, I don't know, do whatever you feel good with.
Right. And I think it also needs to be said that like when we're talking about like large quantities of food in general, I imagine there's just the discomfort that comes with like just eating a lot of food.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when you're eating stuff that's like carb heavy or like very rewarding to your brain, it's like, ooh, this is yummy. I'm going to eat a lot of it. Well, then of course you're going to feel bloated and gross afterwards. Like no matter what the food is.
I feel very comforted by a big old bowl of mac and cheese, but maybe that's
well, as we've already established, I can't do that anymore.
Oh my gosh.
Right, and also like the portion sizes in America. Hello. Like hello, right? Especially if you're going out to eat. Like you can serve 3 people off of the one meal that you've ordered. So I think there's lots of different variables. I always validate the symptoms that people are having. And then the best thing for me, and even for a lot of the GI counterparts and colleagues that I've talked to, I happen to be married to a GI doc, so we end up talking about this stuff a lot. But it's a food diary, which people hate. But just give me a more accurate sense of how much you're consuming and how much is it taking to set off symptoms, because that's going to help us figure out an individualized plan for you.
Mm-hmm. Wow, if anyone wants poop stories, head to Dr. Khan's house. I'm sure you have lots.
That is what we talk about around the dinner table.
I'm married to an ER doc, so I get a whole different set of stories. But yeah, there is a lot of poop involved in those stories, unfortunately, as well. Okay, let's talk about something that's been in the news a lot recently, which is alpha-gal.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So my lay understanding is that this is a tick-borne disease that now I'm probably using all the wrong words, but in a person who previously had no issues eating meat, suddenly they develop an allergy to meat. Is that kind of right?
Yes, that is the gist. Yes, absolutely. So it's something that you develop. It's not something that you are born with. So it's not like a parent who has alpha-gal necessarily puts their kid at higher risk. And you can potentially even outgrow this syndrome. But this is kind of an interesting food reaction for a couple of reasons. So typically when we think about these IgE-mediated food allergies, like to peanut and egg, the traditional allergies, symptoms start pretty quickly, like within 10, 15, 20 minutes, up to an hour or 2. But usually they're pretty quick and it's like a fast onset, you get treatment and fast resolution. And it's the protein in the food. So the milk and the shrimp and the fish and the cashew and the pecan, it's the protein that your immune system is having the overreaction to. But with alpha-gal, it's actually the sugar, it's the carbohydrate. And it results in delayed symptoms, which is sometimes why it takes multiple exposures to like the lamb chops or the burger or the steak before you start to put things together. Because the first couple times it happens, people will often say like, oh, I just had puking and diarrhea. I think it was just like a GI bug or it was like bad food, even though nobody else got sick eating the same food. So the delayed piece of this can be really frustrating. And then but the symptoms are the same that you would see with a traditional allergic reaction. So it's setting off those allergy mast cells. And then when they release, you can get the lip swelling and the coughing and the wheezing and the vomiting and the diarrhea and stuff like this. And it was in the news, what was that? Like a few months ago, like last fall, I think, because somebody passed away due to their alpha-gal reaction, which got a ton of news coverage, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like this is pretty rare. I mean, how often do you see something like this in the clinic, Farah?
True alpha-gal?
Yeah.
Alpha-gal? It's not that common. It is becoming more prevalent because of how the ticks have spread. They're not just like in the southeast portion of the U.S. anymore. So now we're even getting cases like through the Midwest and things like that. But it unfortunately gets misdiagnosed probably more often than we realize, because people will come in to like their GI doc, or I will give you an example from clinic recently. I had a kid who had like chronic abdominal pain. And this is very classic for what we end up seeing, like chronic abdominal pain, was seeing an ear, nose, and throat specialist. No shade to my ENT counterparts. I absolutely need them and refer patients to them. But the ENT doc ordered like these large food allergy panels and alpha-gal testing. And this family like hunts a lot. They do a lot of hiking and camping. They're just outdoor. So he had had multiple tick bites before, but had never really had any symptoms with like burgers and steak and stuff like that. So for the last 2 years, he had been avoiding because of a quote unquote positive test. So this is why earlier I said the history is the most important part, because we have a very high false positive rate. So the testing looks positive, but you're not actually having an allergic reaction to those foods. And the history, like, so we ended up bringing him in for something called a food challenge, where he basically sat down and ate a burger with us, and we watched him in clinic for a few hours, and he did great. And he is so excited to have burgers and steak back into his diet. But it just like, it was an ENT doc that misdiagnosed because they probably didn't take any history. And then the families are the ones that end up holding the bag, right? They had to go seek out a second opinion. They live like 3 hours from our center. Like it was just stupid. It was so stupid. And it happens all the time. So if somebody's having chronic belly pain, alpha-gal is not the test, guys. It's not the test.
Mm-hmm. I know we're getting ready to wrap up. Sarah, I see you're itching to ask that last question, but I feel like we'd be remiss just if we didn't super briefly touch on, actually, we had Dr. Amy Bernard, who's our resident immunologist at Unbiased Science. She wrote this incredible piece on the interaction between things like eczema and skin stuff and these, like food allergies, and how there is some connection there. We can link to this Substack in our show notes, but I don't know if you could just like comment super briefly on like folks who have food allergies, are they more likely to have eczema, vice versa? Like is there's some sort of connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the genetics that drive eczema also drive food allergies. So the disrupted skin barrier then puts you at, especially if you have moderate to severe disease with the eczema, because the barrier is just inflamed and not working like it should, that basically puts you at higher risk of potentially having food allergies. Now, having said that, do I have kids that have moderate to severe eczema and have had no food allergies at all? Yes, absolutely. Do I have kids who have never had eczema or even a patch of dry skin and they have food allergies? Yes. Yeah. I think it keeps me humble in clinic, because just when we think like, oh, we've figured out some risk factors, like a kid will come along and be like not fit the mold at all. But yes, it's all connected. And there's something called an atopic march, where eczema is typically the first thing that presents in the first year of life. And then you can have food allergies, potentially environmental allergies, and asthma. And it's all driven by the genetics of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So interesting. And my son is like the poster child for that. Like he is, asthma, eczema, food allergies. Check. All right, last thing, and then I'm turning it over to Sarah. And I just want a plug here, because we do talk a lot about vaccines. There's this misconception among folks who have egg allergy, even severe egg allergy, that they cannot receive the flu shot. This is not true. First of all, there are egg-based and cell-based vaccines. And previously, people thought that they could only receive the cell-based vaccines if they had an egg allergy. But that's not even true anymore. If you have an egg allergy, even a severe egg allergy, you can safely get any flu shot. It doesn't matter if it's egg-based or not. I mean, obviously, we don't give medical advice here on this podcast, so you could talk about this with your clinician, but the guidance changed and those are safe to get. So don't let that be the reason that you're not getting your flu shot. All right. Sarah?
Put that myth to rest right now.
Dead.
All right, Farah. Well, we like to close out every episode by just asking our guests, what's something that's giving you hope right now in public health and science and like in the world at large currently?
I'm really going to have to dig deep. Yeah. I'm not an optimistic person by nature. So what I will say is that seeing more public health experts and physicians and other clinicians who are evidence-based turning to social media, like 80-something% of people look for health information online, even if it's not on purpose, it's coming up in their scroll. And I think if there are more of us online that are amplifying the same evidence-based message and they're hearing the same thing over and over and over again, like hopefully that gives them a little bit more reassurance when they go in to talk to their family medicine provider or their pediatrician. Because I have found that it's never like one thing that goes viral that like switches a parent to be like, no vaccines, right? It's as this like slow culmination of mis and disinformation. So the more people online who are evidence-based providers, the better. And I love seeing my colleagues online. So that is like the glimmer of hope in the mess that we're in.
And where can we follow you, Farah?
Follow me on Instagram. I am mostly there creating like general allergy education, and then I'm causing a little bit of ruckus on Threads, but that's it.
We love it. We're going to link to that in the show notes.
We love a ruckus.
Thank you. We love a ruckus. We are here for ruckus. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a fun and interesting and educational conversation.
And thank you all for tuning in. We hope you learned a thing or two. Please join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.